Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Breaking U.S. Immigration News. What we're witnessing right now across America is nothing short of extraordinary. From coast to coast, protests are erupting in response to the Trump administration's intensified immigration enforcement operations, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, has found itself at the absolute center of this national firestorm. Today, we're going to break down everything you need to know about these protests, what's actually happening on the ground, and most importantly, what this means for immigrant communities, particularly our senior viewers who may be navigating these challenging times. Over the past several weeks, we've seen an unprecedented surge in ICE enforcement activities. The Trump administration has made it abundantly clear that immigration enforcement is a top priority, and they're backing up that rhetoric with action. What makes this current wave of enforcement different from previous operations is the scale, the scope, and the locations where these operations are taking place. ICE agents are conducting raids in areas that were previously considered sensitive locations, and this shift in policy has sent shockwaves through immigrant communities nationwide. The protests we're seeing didn't emerge out of nowhere. They're the direct result of several high-profile incidents that have captured national attention. In cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Miami, and Houston, demonstrators have taken to the streets by the thousands. These aren't just young activists. We're seeing entire families, community leaders, faith-based organizations, and yes, many senior citizens who are standing up and making their voices heard. The diversity of these protests is striking. You have American citizens standing shoulder to shoulder with documented immigrants, with DACA recipients, with asylum seekers, all united in their concern about the direction of immigration enforcement. Let me paint a picture of what's actually happening at these protests. In downtown Los Angeles, over 15,000 people gathered outside the federal building, completely surrounding the ICE field office. They carried signs, they chanted, they shared personal stories of family members who have been detained or deported. Similar scenes played out in Chicago's Loop District, where protesters blocked major intersections, bringing traffic to a standstill for hours. The message was clear and consistent. Communities are demanding more humane immigration policies and greater accountability from enforcement agencies. What's particularly noteworthy is the response from local law enforcement and city officials. In several sanctuary cities, mayors and police chiefs have found themselves walking a tightrope. They're trying to maintain public order while also expressing sympathy for the protesters' concerns. We've seen some heated confrontations, not between protesters and police, but between local authorities and federal agents. This tension between federal immigration enforcement and local jurisdictions is creating a constitutional crisis of sorts, raising fundamental questions about states' rights, federal authority, and the proper balance between security and compassion. Now, let's talk about what's driving this intensified ICE enforcement. The Trump administration has argued that these operations are necessary to protect American communities from criminal elements within the undocumented population. They point to statistics showing arrests of individuals with criminal records, including some with serious felony convictions. The administration's position is straightforward. Laws must be enforced, borders must be secured, and those who entered the country illegally or overstayed their visas must face consequences. They maintain that this isn't about targeting families or being cruel, but about restoring the rule of law and ensuring that immigration happens through proper legal channels. However, critics of these operations tell a very different story. Immigration advocacy groups have documented numerous cases where ICE operations have swept up individuals with no criminal history whatsoever. They point to cases of people who have lived in the United States for decades, who have American citizen children, who own businesses, who pay taxes, who are integral parts of their communities, suddenly being detained and facing deportation. There are heartbreaking stories of families being torn apart, of children coming home from school to find their parents gone, of elderly immigrants who came to this country seeking a better life, now facing the prospect of being sent back to countries they barely remember. For our senior viewers, this situation is particularly concerning. Many older immigrants arrived in the United States years or even decades ago. They may have come on temporary visas that they overstayed, or they may have entered without documentation during periods when enforcement was less strict. Over the years, they built lives here. They raised families, worked hard, became grandparents. They may have health conditions that require ongoing medical care, care that might not be available if they're deported. The prospect of being removed from the only home they've known in their later years is terrifying, and it's this fear that's driving many seniors to join these protests or to seek legal assistance. The legal landscape surrounding these enforcement actions is incredibly complex. Immigration law is federal law, which means that ultimately the federal government has the authority to enforce immigration statutes. However, the way that enforcement is conducted, the priorities that are set, and the level of resources devoted to different aspects of enforcement can vary dramatically from one administration to another. What we're seeing now is an administration that has made clear that virtually all undocumented immigrants are priorities for removal, not just those with serious criminal convictions. This represents a significant shift from previous policies that focused enforcement resources on specific categories of individuals. The protests have also highlighted the role of technology in modern immigration enforcement. ICE has access to sophisticated databases, biometric systems, and surveillance tools that previous generations of immigration agents could never have imagined. When someone is arrested by local police, even for a minor infraction, their fingerprints are often shared with federal databases. This means that ICE can identify and locate undocumented immigrants with unprecedented efficiency. Privacy advocates argue that this level of surveillance and data sharing creates a climate of fear that extends far beyond the undocumented population, affecting anyone who might look or sound foreign. Community organizations have sprung into action in response to these enforcement operations. Know Your Rights workshops are being held in churches, community centers, and libraries across the country. These sessions teach immigrants about their constitutional protections, such as the right to remain silent and the right to refuse entry to ICE agents without a judicial warrant. Lawyers are volunteering their time to provide free legal consultations. Rapid response networks have been established, where volunteers can quickly mobilize if ICE agents are spotted in a neighborhood. These grassroots efforts represent communities taking matters into their own hands, trying to protect their most vulnerable members. The economic implications of these enforcement operations are also significant. Industries that rely heavily on immigrant labor, including agriculture, construction, hospitality, and food service, are feeling the impact. Business owners report difficulty finding workers, and some have had to curtail operations or increase wages to attract employees. Economists have pointed out that mass deportations could have ripple effects throughout the economy, potentially leading to labor shortages, increased prices for consumers, and reduced tax revenues for local governments. These economic concerns add another dimension to the debate over immigration enforcement. From a humanitarian perspective, the situation is deeply troubling to many Americans. Stories of children being separated from parents, of people being detained in facilities with substandard conditions, of individuals being deported to countries where they face persecution or violence. These stories trouble the conscience of a nation that has always prided itself on being a beacon of hope and opportunity. Religious leaders from various faiths have spoken out, arguing that these enforcement policies conflict with fundamental values of compassion, mercy, and human dignity. They point to scriptural teachings about welcoming the stranger and caring for the vulnerable. The media coverage of these protests has been extensive, but also polarized. Depending on which news outlet you watch, you might get very different impressions of what's happening. Some networks portray the protesters as concerned citizens and families fighting to keep their communities together. Others depict them as lawbreakers who are trying to obstruct legitimate law enforcement activities. This divergence in coverage reflects the deep political divisions in our country over immigration policy. It also makes it challenging for people to get an accurate, balanced understanding of what's really happening. Looking ahead, the legal challenges to these enforcement operations are mounting. Civil liberties organizations have filed lawsuits alleging constitutional violations, claiming that ICE operations amount to racial profiling or that they're being conducted in ways that violate due process protections. Courts across the country are hearing cases that could potentially limit or modify how immigration enforcement is conducted. At the same time, the administration is defending its actions vigorously, arguing that it has both the legal authority and the constitutional duty to enforce immigration laws as written by Congress. For seniors who are worried about their immigration status, there are some important things to understand. First, if you have been in the United States for a long time, there may be legal options available that you're not aware of. Certain forms of relief from deportation exist for people who have been in the country for extended periods, especially if they have family ties to American citizens, or if they would face extreme hardship if removed. Second, it's absolutely critical to consult with a qualified immigration attorney, not a notary public or someone who promises easy fixes for money. Unfortunately, immigration fraud is rampant, and vulnerable people are often targeted by scammers. Third, having your important documents organized and accessible is important. This includes any evidence of how long you've been in the United States, evidence of family relationships, medical records, and any previous immigration applications. The protests show no signs of slowing down. If anything, they appear to be gaining momentum. Organizers are planning larger demonstrations, and there's talk of coordinated national actions. At the same time, the administration has indicated that it will not be deterred by public pressure and will continue with its enforcement agenda. This sets up a prolonged conflict that could extend through the election season and beyond. The outcome of this struggle will likely shape immigration policy for years to come and will say something profound about who we are as a nation. What's clear is that this issue touches on fundamental questions about American identity. Are we a nation of immigrants that welcomes newcomers and gives them opportunities to build better lives? Are we a nation of laws that must enforce its borders and immigration statutes consistently? Can we be both? How do we balance security concerns with humanitarian values? How do we treat people who entered illegally but have established deep roots in American communities? These are not easy questions, and reasonable people can disagree on the answers. As these events continue to unfold, it's essential to stay informed from reliable sources, to understand your rights if you're an immigrant, and to engage with these issues thoughtfully and compassionately. Whether you support stricter enforcement or more lenient policies, the one thing we should all agree on is that immigrants are human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. The way we handle this challenge will be remembered by history, and it will shape the kind of country we pass on to future generations. Thank you so much for watching Breaking U.S. Immigration News. We'll continue to follow this story closely and bring you updates as the situation develops. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an important update. Share this video with friends and family members who need to stay informed about immigration developments. And remember, in times of uncertainty, knowledge is power. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.